what does the European Union and the WEF and those people, what do they all want? They want the end of commercial banking. So you have the old oligarchs of Europe desperately trying to do away with all forms of private production of capital. If the Americans decide to say, you know what, no, we're not going to go along with this. We're not going to go along with destroying capitalism for climate change. We're not going to destroy, we're not going to do all of these things. Then the whole project, the whole British/European project collapses. In this case, the British and Davos are absolutely in cahoots. They want the United States and Russia destroyed, and then they're going to fight over who gets to run the world afterwards. That's the framework. Evil, malignant narcissists do not back down.
Hello everybody, I'm Paul Buitink and welcome back to the Reinvent Money podcast, a show about money and power. Today I'm talking to Tom Luongo of the Gold, Goats and Guns newsletter. He believes that Europe has been attempting a coup against the US, especially during the Obama and Biden years, and that Trump will try to unwind all of that and make the US sovereign and great again. As a European, I obviously want to understand what he means by that. I also want to get his view on Trump's cabinet picks, what's going to happen with the reserve status of the dollar and the Eurodollar system. And finally, we'll discuss both gold and Bitcoin. Hi, Tom. Good to see you.
Good to meet you, Paul. And thank you for setting this up. And I'm a little chagrined that I almost forgot about it and was about 10, 15 minutes late to this. But I'm looking forward to this. It should be fun.
No worries. I very much look forward to it. So here I am. I always thought that it's actually the US being the masters ever since the US emerged as the victor of the Second World War, and Europe is the vessel, the slave state. But you're saying it's the other way around. So that's kind of a whole new insight for me. So could you lay it out to me? How and why has Europe been controlling the US over the past years?
Well, what I would say is I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it quite that definitively. The U.S. has got plenty of sins here. We're not blameless or anything like that. This is a very complicated relationship that goes back hundreds of years to the original colonization of North America and everything else. But I hate to characterize any of this stuff in terms of simple heroes, simple villains. There's nobody's black and white here. Everybody's gray at a very deep level. And, we could speak for hours about the history on this. But in the time after World War II, when you think about the U.S. after World War II was over, Europe was bombed. It was really bombed back to the Stone Ages in terms of its infrastructure. So it needed a rebuild. And of course, the United States, facilitated that through the Marshall Plan and in a variety of different ways. And but one of the least told aspects of that story is that fleeing the sovereign debt crisis of the 1920s in Europe, a lot of European capital came to the United States and helped build the industrial might and powerhouse that it became during the 1930s, the late 1930s into the 1940s, in order to fight World War II. Now, one could argue that, and again, this is a frame, this is a framework. It is not the only framework on how to view World War II, which is an incredibly complex period of history. But one could argue that Britain and France in particular got themselves in trouble and eventually needed the United States to bail them out. And similar to how they got themselves into trouble after World War I. And so it sets up this dynamic where European capital fled the aftermath of World War I, but at the same time created the conditions for World War II, in which they always intended for the Americans to come in and fight on their behalf after, building, in effect, creating Hitler and creating the framework to send Hitler to go attack Stalin and the Russians, which was always the British plan. It was always the French plan. So it's a very complex thing. And so that sets the backdrop for what's been happening since then. So what we had during the Marshall Plan was all of that capital that moved into the United States, helped build the industrial might and power of the United States, has been sent back over to Europe. And then y'all use that to build the European Union. Now, The question is whether the European Union is actually a good thing or not. And this is, again, very, very, very simplified version of this history. I'm not in any way, manner, shape, or form sitting here trying to say this is the definitive history. This is how things happen. Come on, let's be realistic here. It's very, 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 very difficult. But it's consistent with more than 200 years worth of globalist ideology coming out of a lot of the oligarchy, old oligarchy of Europe, from Club of Rome to City of London to da-da-da-da. So there's all of that mixed into this as well. So what do we have? We have a U.S. empire that gets built. It flexes its muscles over Europe. Europe attempts to build the European Union and then use that as a regulatory scheme in order to normalize the West in some respects. As at the same time, we have a lot of people within the United States power structure, like empire, feel that okay, let us ally with with British and European forces in order to continue the age-old war against the Russians and continue colonizing the Middle East in order to colonize the oil flow out of the Middle East and everything else. It's all part of that same structure. And now at the end of all of this, after we've spent ourselves into nearly debtor's prison, we've destroyed the dollar, we've destroyed the national balance sheet. All of that money that came in and built the American balance sheet is now being pulled out. And there has been pulled out and rebuilt Europe. But at the same time, Europe's, in my mind, squandered the money by building a welfare warfare state subsidized by American largesse that was created an unsustainable project called the European Union. And they're fighting desperately to hold on to that project. And that has been a long-term project. If you read the work of the people who were the architects of this project, it's pretty clear that's what their goal always was. And, I'm an anti-communist at the end of the day. I look at the European Union and I go, like you put an E in front of the USSR and it looks kind of similar, except with a European flavor as opposed to a Russian flavor. It's really not that much different. As my friend Alexander Mercouris over at the Duran, when I mentioned this ages ago at a podcast, he kind of looked at me and said, well, Tom, that the USSR was literally like the greatest technocratic state the world had ever seen up until that point. And I'm like, that's a very good point, Alexander. So now we're in this transition period. Now all of these themes, all of these narratives, all of these ideas and these plans are coming together all at the same time. And the Americans at their core are saying no. And the oligarchy of Europe, who have allied them, or the people that within our Congress, and we're talking about the Obamas and their ilk, we're talking about the Lindsey Grahams and their ilk, but they map more to the British remnant. They all have worked really, really hard to continue selling the country out, by the pound back to Europe. And it gets even more complicated than that, but that's the broad stroke of it. And when we look at it, we look at the fight between Donald Trump and the entrenched oligarchy, both of Europe and the UK and the United States. Populism itself, no matter what flavor it is, be it Hungarian or American or British or whatever, is always even Dutch in the case of Geert Wilders, or German in the case of AFD, or even to a lesser extent Sarah Wagenknecht. So when you map it all that way, we're at that moment, right? If the Americans decide to say, you know what, no, we're not going to go along with this. We're not going to go along with destroying capitalism for climate change. We're not going to destroy, we're not going to do all of these things. Then the whole project, the whole British/European project collapses because the Americans still control, their own vast wealth and a political system that is far more dynamic and resistant to capture and control and can be torn down and rebuilt much more easily than the European system can. And then we can start getting into capital flow and why I think those things are going to continue from there. This is the broad strokes of it to give you, give you an idea of where my head is on this. And it's very complicated, but it's also and honestly, there's no blame here. Like I look at everybody involved in this, be it American, be it middle-class Americans like myself, or middle-class Britons, or middle-class Dutch or Italians or Germans, right? They're all the victims of this big or oligarchic power play that exists up here that serves their interests, not ours. And so that's the long and the short of it.
Because as a European, I always think like right here in Europe, we don't really. Of course, we have some defense companies, but we really rely on the US for protection. Also, we don't have big software companies that control social media, and companies like Amazon, Facebook, X. Most of that is in the US as well. And then the US has the dollar. So it seems like the US has more control over us than the other way around. But you're saying above that, like a layer on top of that.
A layer above that, it's actually the real fight here is that everybody's being victimized here. We're being torn apart at the seams in the United States. Like we're being attacked economically, socially, politically, legally, in every way. And we can talk about it from a tax policy perspective. We can talk about it from a regulatory perspective. We can talk about it from an interest rate perspective. It's all self-consistent, but the same dynamics are in play within the European Union, and the same dynamics are in play within Britain, within the United Kingdom, all with the goal of replacing national sovereignty. Right. And with a transnational global oligarchy. And I mean, honest with you, they've made this abundantly clear. They want to transfer political power to the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, the BIS, those post-World War II institutional structures. And those structures, by the way, at this point are not controlled by the United States. The UN is not really controlled by the United States. We all have veto power on the Security Council. So the United States, so the United Nations basically cancels itself out. But as far as the BIS is concerned, we don't control that anymore. We don't control the IMF anymore. When Dominique Strauss-Kahn was nuts and sluts out of the IMF, and Christine Lagarde was put in, that was a big moment where the United States really started to lose control of the IMF. When that shift from one form of globalism to another took place, and for a long, long time, our banks on Wall Street went along with this because it was, well, hey, they were getting paid, they were fat and happy. That system collapsed in 2008, and we've had the big banks here in the United States have been on life support ever since. They were basically wholly owned subsidiaries of the Federal Reserve under Bernanke and Yellen. And then if you look carefully at the way Jerome Powell has run the Fed, and I'm talking now specifically pre-COVID and post-COVID, not during COVID, you'll see that Powell was working assiduously behind the scenes to change the way dollars are priced around the world. And for the United States to get control of its own monetary policy, which the Eurodollar markets controlled, since the 1950s, and was truly instantiated when everybody went on the LIBOR standard in 1984, and then the Plaza Accord in 1985 to break currency exchange rates. That system has broken down since the breakdown of LIBOR, the creation of SOFR, the Secured Overnight Financing Rate here in the U.S., which has now broken the bond between European capital markets effectively trying to price dollars and American markets trying to price dollars. And that's a and that's a power move by the United States. There's no doubt about it. But hey, it's like everything else. We can't afford the global reserve currency anymore. Triffin's paradox has destroyed us. So now it's a matter of, we have to take what we have left, consolidate it, and rebuild it. And we have a long rebuilding process here in the United States. But that also means that we're no longer going to subsidize Europe. And I think it's going to be good for both parties in the long run, just not for the oligarchs who think that they run the world.
Right. And Trump has said several times in the past that he really likes to have a strong dollar and for the dollar to be a king of all currencies. Do you think that what you just said, that Trump also understands that it's not great to always have the world reserve currency. That it has also disadvantages, and that it will hollow out your industrial base, and in the long run it will lead to shrinkage of the middle class and all the other problems that the U.S. currently faces. You think Trump understands that on a basic level?
I think he does. At least I think he does now. Remember, during Trump's first administration, the dollar was quite weak, right? He actually pursued weak dollar policy. I think this time he can't avoid a strong dollar policy because my friend Brent Johnson talks about the dollar milkshake theory. There's no way of getting around that. Yeah. I agree with Brent. And by the way, Brent and I both agree like this. Like the whole dollar milkshake argument is very time limited. He's talking about it over a specific time period. That means that ultimately that there are many moves that everybody can make around the world to mitigate the worst of that, and then we basically break up into currency blocks around the world. And even Jerome Powell agrees with that argument because he's testified before the Senate saying, "Look, there's room in the world for more than one reserve currency." And he said this at a Humphrey Hawkins testimony about 2.5 years ago, if not 3 years ago. It's in the before time. It's been a long time since he made that statement, literally to Elizabeth Warren, the head of the Senate Banking Committee. And, they were all shocked and angry and whatnot, but it's true. The head of the Federal Reserve is literally saying we can't afford that anymore. I think Trump understands that because what he really wants to do is set up and the Fed has already set this table for him, which is to reverse the flow of dollars from out to in. And how that happens and how long it takes to change those dynamics and with how much pain we're going to all go through in the process, well, that's all where the commentary is at this point. That's the fun part. That's where all the detail, that's where the devil's in the details. If Trump, and I think what Trump wants and what he's been threatening is a tariff structure, which finally breaks down some of these old Marshall Plan tariffs that were in place to help Europe rebuild. And let's get rid of the protectionist tariff and actually use them as a negotiating tactic to actually bring the general tariff level down across the board and allow everybody to start everybody start becoming more dynamic. And this is particularly important for German industry. Because the Germans...
So can you explain it to me? So these tariffs back in the day, that because of high tariffs, European industry was able to grow because we could focus on our own production rather than importing goods from the US.
Well, we had such a huge advantage. That was part of the Marshall Plan. We sent money in to help rebuild. And then we also put up protection tariffs around, say, German automobiles and Japanese automobiles and certain other things in areas where we competed so that because we had a strong enough economy to sell those things domestically. We didn't need to colonize Europe with Fords and GMs and Chevys and all the rest of it. You guys could build BMWs and rebuild your banking system and all the rest of it. We didn't need that. And those protection tariffs were meant as a barrier to us going in there rapaciously and taking that market share from you. Now, notice that they didn't do that with Russia in the 1990s. No, they went in and literally tried to strip mine the country. Okay. So those tariffs, unfortunately, are still in place. And I didn't even know this until I was watching Howard Lutnick on a CNBC segment about 3 months ago. And I'm like, really? I had no idea that those tariffs were still in place. They're still in place. And they're 100% tariffs.
You said so because on automobiles, I checked this morning, and because you mentioned 100% tariffs, but if I import an American car younger than 30 years, I pay 10%. You mentioned 100%.
I heard it was 100%. If I'm wrong about the number, it doesn't. Ultimately, the number does not. The number is not what's important. The fact is that it doesn't. German car makers don't need this. And actually, in a matter of fact, one of the other problems with having a tariff like that on competition for that long, having that protectionism for that long, is that it destroys the dynamism of the competitiveness of the industry itself. I mean, sorry, but like I've sat in BMWs and Volkswagens that come to the United States, and I'm like, I don't buy them. Like American cars are not that much worse in terms of their quality, and Japanese cars are still excellent. But even they have sincere problems. Like, anybody who's ever owned a Volkswagen knows about the electrical gremlins that just kind of show up randomly and like shut your car off. Like I've owned a VW Beetle, I've owned other Volkswagen, and I like Volkswagens. I love driving them. And so I used to describe them as the car you most love to hate. Like you love your Volkswagen while you're driving it until the day it like strands you by the side of the road. And then you're like, it's so well,
Yeah.
I love driving this car until it stops working. Or until the air conditioner randomly, stops working in July in Florida. And that's just not cool.
No.
So
you're saying that Trump is going to impose those tariffs basically to get back at us, and in the end, maybe perhaps to start a sort of a dynamic where all tariffs will go down again. So he's basically beating us at our own game.
I don't want to characterize it as adversarial. I'd rather characterize it as an opening statement in a new negotiation. Let's negotiate a different trade environment, and let's stop this idea that the European Union has the right to impose their law on our companies, like they've been trying to do to Elon Musk, or shake Apple down for $17 billion in antitrust fees and all this other rotten nonsense, which are literally just, they're just bribes. It's like envelope day on The Sopranos, for Christ's sake. It's just mob tactics, right? And governments in general act this way, and so why is and the European Union has been able to act this way because we've had people running the American government, especially under the Obama administration, and when Biden, as far as I'm concerned, is just the third term of Obama. You have people at Treasury, you have people at the SEC, you have people in the Department of Justice, and at every level, and you have all of these agencies that were setting rules based on the desires of the rest of the world to continue to blunt American advantage, and that's all fine and dandy. But hey, at some point, you have to stop that. You have to stop protecting things that are dying, because now you basically it's that old adage: if you love something, set it free. Well, if you want to see an industry become dynamic, you've got to stop protecting it. You've got to let it fly, and it's time for that process to happen all across Europe, and it would be good for everybody. And I don't know, how long it will take for y'all to retool, but the European Union is certainly a major impediment to that happening, right? Because every day it does even more so into a regulatory morass.
No, I agree, and that's why you see the rise of patriots across Europe and countries. Waking up to the fact that being sovereign is probably going to lead to more prosperity than being in a straitjacket of the European Union and the euro.
Yeah, populism is populism, as Ron Paul likes to say, is popular, right? Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, Paul. I mean, I don't know how much you've delved into my past work, but I watch European populist movements more closely than I watch American populist movements. I spent a lot of time digging into Italian politics to understand the rise first of Lega and M5S, and now the Brothers of Italy. Same thing in Germany. I don't follow the Dutch as closely, but I've watched them try to stop Geert Wilders from taking control. You see the same thing in France. You see the same thing how they persecuted Hungary. The situation in Poland is really, really complex because Poland's being torn apart at the seams, and the Poles never seem to make the right decision for themselves. And then of course Ukraine and Russia and everything else. So I focus on all of this stuff, and I'm Catalonian independence. I've covered that in the past. I've covered all of these things to try and in the hopes that somebody is going to finally be able to create a definitive and durable populist revolt at a political level against this oppressive oligarchy that really runs all of the election schemes and runs and manipulates everybody behind the scenes.
Yeah,
you can call them you can call them whoever, but it's all just that same process.
Yeah. But if you criticize oligarchs, then what do you think of Elon Musk's involvement in Trump's administration? I mean, he's the richest man in the world. Of course, he has an incentive to sign all sorts of deals that are good for his company. So,
sure.
Isn't it classic? Big business mingling with big government and a form of oligarchy for at least from
possible. So Musk is somebody I like to operate under the rule of. It's a great question, by the way, but I like to operate under the rule of distrust but verify. Right? Assume everybody is evil and lying and cynically out for power and everything else, and then let them prove to you otherwise that they're not. And Elon is in a very, very, very advantageous position right now, controlling X, controlling SpaceX, controlling Starlink, which is incredibly important, and now having Trump's ear, and now sitting at the table to do away with a lot of the regulatory morass that we have in the United States at the Department of Government Efficiency that's going to be headed by him and Vivek Ramaswamy, right? And I don't trust Elon per se, but I think a guy like Musk and having delved into Musk's background, the same thing with his former partner over at PayPal, Peter Thiel, and people like that, what we call colloquially over here the PayPal mafia. These people are would-be oligarchs that have a fundamentally different worldview than the one that is currently thinks they're still ruling things, that, you know, downstream of the Bank of England and the old Venetian banks and the Dutch banks and, you know, and all of that, which is that those people that we're currently ruled by are hostile to our existence. My friend Picanones likes to put it that way. It's like they're hostile to our existence. They actually want to kill us all, think that the world is only sustainable to about 1 billion people, and, you know, and are willing to poison us and sterilize us and make us eat bugs and all this other stuff, all this other rotten nonsense in order for them to maintain power. Guys like Musk and those other ones, they're much more indifferent to our existence. They want to do cool shit. They want to build parallel systems, and they have built parallel systems to the existing ones. And so it can look like a meet the new boss, same as the old boss scenario. But I think fundamentally, and as of right now, it doesn't look that way. And moreover, even if that's the case, and it's the same argument I make about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve exists as the U.S. central bank as a representative of the commercial banking interests of the United States. Okay? That doesn't make them the good guy. It makes them the people, the most powerful actor capable of defending the commercial banking interests of the United States. Now, let's ask the question, and by extension, commercial banking interests the world over, or at least as it would pertain to Europe and everybody else. What does the European Union and the WEF and those people, what do they all want? They want the end of commercial banking, right? They want to do away with the two-tiered monetary system of where the central bank issues the currency to the commercial banks, who then lend it out to the private economy, right? And the commercial banks can be as big as JP Morgan and as small as your local community bank or credit union, right? That system with a central bank, with a retail central bank digital currency, collapses that into one circle. The central bank, the political class, determines whether you get access to capital or not. This is a class, this would be the public formation of capital. Some politician, some potentially unelected oligarch has the choice, gets to decide whether or not you get access to capital, the banking system, and everything else. So while I don't consider people like Jamie Dimon or John Solomon, the heads of JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, as good guys, I do see them as people defending that which they do, which is commercial banking. And they want to still be able to do that. And so they're going to use their agent, the Federal Reserve, to price dollars and set up systems to maintain the flow of dollars that advantages commercial banks as opposed to other central banks. That makes sense to me. Now, in the process, by the way, if you look at what's happening, if you look at this, if you dig into what's happened inside the Fed, I'm using this as an example of how you could look at Musk and Thiel and all those guys. If you look at how Powell has changed a lot of the facilities within the Federal Reserve and the way the Federal Reserve operates, and if you look at the implications of SOFR in and of itself, it actually pretends the possibility of going back to a Federal Reserve closer to its original mandate, as opposed to the immense monstrosity that it is today, that with an immense amount of centralized power over the banking system, which it shouldn't have and was never intended to have. Now, we can be all libertarian about this and say, well, it was always going to wind up going there because power corrupts and, yada, yada, yada. I agree. I can take that, put that argument, put it on that side of my head. But at the same time, I can also say, if you have people who are building alternative systems, and now I'm specifically speaking about payment rails, Bitcoin, yada, yada, stable coins and everything else. If you have that parallel system competing with this system, now all of a sudden you have a different playing field for creating new types and kinds of banking and access to capital that didn't exist before. So you have the old oligarchs of Europe desperately trying to do away with all forms of private production of capital. And they've now pissed off the biggest guys at the table who believe in the private production of capital, and they're fighting. Meanwhile, a parallel system is emerging from underneath, which is going to shift the game board. They're going to go away, and now we're going to have this fight later on.
Yeah,
and
so that's also
the commercial banking system will act as a brake on any oligarchic plans of the quote unquote PayPal mafia.
Yeah. So is that why Trump and his guys are very much in favor of crypto and Bitcoin, because they really appreciate the private formation of capital and alternatives to the current financial system? Or do you think they're going to be serious about Bitcoin in the future? Like, for example, the Bitcoin Reserve Act, or the law that requires the US to buy 1 million Bitcoin, I believe, or how many was it? Like 1 million over 5 years, I believe.
Something like that. I don't know.
Is that going to happen for real?
I do think it's real. I do think it's very real, and I'll tell you, I'll tell you that the Federal Reserve is actually willing to sign off on it as well, and that's going to bake your noodle. Ready?
Yeah, because it doesn't make any sense to announce it in advance, right? If you're announcing you're going to buy 1 million Bitcoins and you drive up the price, you have to do it secretly, of course. So it doesn't make any sense from a. Okay, explain to me why.
I know, I understand that. You don't want people front running the trade that you're going to make. They already have, right?
Yeah.
But they've already front run the trade. What you're doing actually here is you're actually helping the Federal Reserve by doing that, and I'll explain why. And I didn't think of this. I had a patron actually put this idea in my head, I don't know, about 18 months ago or something like that. Maybe 2 years ago now. It's been a while. Let's look at Tether. Let's talk about Tether. Let's talk about Letitia James in the Southern District of New York suing Tether for, improprieties and, are they a Ponzi scheme, blah, 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 blah. It's filed in the Southern District of New York, which is the purview of the New York money center banks. And it ends with, during Trump's first term, with a slap on the wrist for Tether. And all they have to do is file quarterly reports of their balance sheet and everything else. That's it. What do we find out about Tether? Well, Tether's owns a whole lot of short-term T-bills and a little bit of gold and some cash and a little bit of Bitcoin. Not really all that interesting. They basically own T-bills. Well, now think about that. And now think about that post-2022, where SOFR and SOFR futures trading, as opposed to Eurodollar futures trading, is now dominant. Or by the end of 2020, by the middle of 2023, SOFR futures are dominating Eurodollar futures, and Eurodollar futures are now no longer even listed on the COMEX. They've been sunsetted because SOFR won. Why? Because the Fed backed SOFR. Now, what is SOFR? SOFR is a debt indexing rate that is set on the market through the repo markets and the money markets. Like it's a market rate that's backed up with collateral, and that collateral is U.S. Treasuries or anything else people are willing to repo. Now let's think about Tether, and let's think about Bitcoin, and let's think about that big pile of U.S. Treasuries, that short-term T-bills that undergird Tether's balance sheet. Then go back to 2023 or 2021, where systemically all of these crypto stable coins were getting knocked off one by one by one, except Tether. In effect, the Fed blessed Tether because in order for Bitcoin to be a tangible, any kind of stable asset, and it's a bearer asset like gold, right? It's a bearer asset, no counterparty risk. It's like gold, except that it can remain liquid. Peter Schiff hates me when I say things like this, but it's true. Like it or not, Peter. It's a bearer asset. It's I like to call it the 21st century equivalent of bearer bonds. Okay? He who owns them, he who presents them owns them. Nobody else owns them, right? So now, if you think of it that way, all of a sudden Bitcoin becomes a really nice liquidity sink and a potential for effectively third-party collateral of the SOFR market, because all these T-bills are going to float in and out, and because you need, in order for Bitcoin to trade and trade reasonably stably, it needs something to trade against, right? When you sell Bitcoins, you buy Ethereum? No, Tether. And what is Tether? And does the Fed want Bitcoin trading directly against dollars? No. Then that screws with their SOMA account. It impedes their monetary policy. But Bitcoin can exist over here, trading nicely and stably against Tether. And Tether is a nice marginal sink for treasury demand, for short-term treasury demand. So it winds up being part of the monetary system. It winds up like Bitcoin is already in effect on the Fed's balance sheet. In that respect,
and if the US is going to buy Bitcoin, it will give credibility to Bitcoin, and it will give legitimacy to Bitcoin. It will also then maybe lead to other countries buying Bitcoin as well. So possibly other countries would then sell or dump their US treasuries in order to buy Bitcoin. So is it not also undermining the treasury market by? Well,
not really. It's just changing. It's just changing the duration, because they're buying Bitcoin, and then in order to trade Bitcoin, you got to buy Tether. As they
it's
buy,
moving
right?
Basically from other reserve balance, like from other balance sheets from central banks across the world to possibly Tether.
It's changing the flow of treasuries, right? And it's blunting any de-dollarization that's happening overseas, and it becomes a source of liquidity, easily tradable, very liquid liquidity for the U.S. banking system and the U.S. money markets, in order to deal with any derivative time mismatches in case somebody gets into trouble. It's creating a kind of elastic money with hard collateral as a backstop that the banking system in many ways hasn't had for a long time, because we didn't really use gold that way. We were trying to use, and sometimes gold is used that way, but not really, because, regulatorily, and this is part of the reason why Gary Gensler at the SEC worked so freaking hard to stop any kind of definitive crypto regulation. Now, you really want to bake your noodle. The first tax is if I'm right about if I'm right about a lot of this, the first taxes that Trump needs to get rid of are capital gains taxes on gold, silver, and Bitcoin.
Yeah.
One, it creates a monetary impulse for silver, which hasn't been there for 25 or 30 or 40 years. Two, it now allows gold to flow properly. The reason why gold doesn't flow, and the real reason why Bitcoin doesn't flow, is because of capital gains taxation. So get rid of capital gains tax on those things and effectively make them currency. And in that respect, and gold shouldn't be subject to capital gains tax anyway. It's completely against U.S. law, and yet we still do it. So
yeah. Because what is Trump's view on gold?
I don't know. I don't think Trump really cares about gold. I think Trump cares more about interest rates right now and the flow of the dollar. Because what he wants right now, I know what he wants. He wants to reshape the national balance sheet, get the cost of that debt on that balance sheet down as low as possible, right? And that's why on a Thursday he'll come out and complain about Jerome Powell's high interest rates, and then on a Friday he'll go, that Powell guy is okay. Like, he knows what's going on here.
Yeah,
Powell's actually already set Trump up not quite nicely, and he's done so by first holding interest rates at 5.5% until September. when clearly the credit markets in the United States and the bank balance sheets and everything else were screaming that the Fed needed to cut rates earlier than that. And yet Powell didn't do so. Why? Do you really think he cut in September because MSNBC thinks that, or CNBC thinks that, oh, he was trying to, at the last moment, Powell was trying to get Kamala Harris elected? No, that window, that boat had already sailed. If he wanted to get Kamala Harris elected, he would have cut interest rates back in March. He held interest rates that high to starve the economy, to force Harris and Biden and everybody else into this moment where they were literally screwed. They ran out of room. And in September, he comes in with a 50 basis point cut to signal to the entire world that, yeah, the credit system in the United States is in worse shape than we thought it was based on bond yields, currency exchange rates, and everything else. We have a problem, folks. And that's why when he cut 50 basis points, we saw the long end of the yield curve rise dramatically, which has only now been blunted by massive, and I mean massive, buying by who? European central banks, desperately trying to hold bond yields down and the euro up.
Yeah.
By buying treasuries, selling their dollar reserves. Eventually, they're going to run out of their dollar reserves, which is about where they are right now.
Yeah, because you're expecting another euro crisis, right? Because euro is going down already versus the dollar. I also saw a report from the ECB today coming out that there might well be another euro crisis because the system is very vulnerable. So we'll basically everything that Trump is going to do over the next few years to cut ties with the European banking system to bring dollars back home. Is it going to lead? Is it going to accelerate another euro crisis?
I think it is, and I think it's sadly I think it's necessary. What I think it's going to do is destroy. It could destroy the euro, and it could destroy the European Union. And I mean, is Germany going to go along with this? Is Germany going to go along with a 50% haircut in the price of the euro?
No, I don't think so. Well, they've gone along with a lot of things, though. Every time they surprise me with what they accept.
But they have only because they've had people like Angela Merkel. And that whole political class in Germany is old. That's what I call Davos, Paul. Like they're the lieutenants. Merkel was there to hold everything in place and not let anything move. They thought they were going to win. They never thought that they were going to. I'll be honest with you. I believe, especially throughout 2016 and all of that, all through the 2010s and then the 2016 and 2020, that the goal was to get get control again over the monetary policy of the United States. The goal was to get rid of Powell, replace him with Lael Brainerd, who was an MMT or an Obama lackey, pass trillions of dollars worth of ruinous spending that would have to be monetized, to force the Fed back to the zero bound, and then they could have their Eurodollar explosion market in order to fight climate change, the 25 or 30 or 40 trillion dollars they need to fight climate change, while they pick a fight with Russia, which they forced the United States to fight on their behalf. That was their plan. That was all. It's all. I like to call it's the big Microsoft project file over at Evil Corp Central. This was our plan, and then Brexit happened, and then Trump got elected, and then Powell instituted SOFR behind the scenes with a 5-year rollout. Oops. Yeah. And then they tried COVID in order to force Powell back to the zero bound, which they did. But then he comes out of COVID, gets his second term set in stone, where Biden runs out of runway in February 2022 of trying to block Powell's reappointment until the Fed, the FOMC itself, votes him chair until reconfirmation, or whatever the hell the term is. I think it's chair pro tem. And that happens on I don't remember the exact dates, but that happens on a Monday. On Wednesday, Biden says, okay, well, we'll go for a reconfirmation hearing. On Thursday, 80-20 in Powell's favor. And at the next FOMC meeting, he raises interest rates.
What's interesting in your frame, the Fed is actually are the good guys to a certain extent. So this whole message of end the Fed that we saw Ron Paul saying for many years ago. I think it was already in 2008, 9, 10, that era. I saw that recently coming back again. I saw also Elon Musk endorsing it. But in your view, and if I understand you correctly, there's no need to end the Fed because the Fed is playing along with Trump, and maybe Powell is a MAGA guy then in the end.
Well, I think that's a gross simplification of it, but it's not bad. I mean, don't get me wrong. You're there. Yes. What I think is the following, and I've been screaming about this for a while now. And I've even excoriated Thomas Massey on this stuff. And like, guys, yeah, in 2008, 2012, I'm an end the Fed guy. In 2016, I'm an end the Fed guy. In 2020, I'm an end the Fed guy. And then Powell raises the reverse repo rate 5 basis points and starts crushing the euro. And I don't understand what it means. I just know that the euro is going to get crushed. I then start really thinking about all of the things that I saw during COVID and the mild clashes between Lagarde and Powell. And I start putting all this stuff together. I listened very carefully to all the stuff that Martin Armstrong's been talking about and all these people. And I'm like, oh my, and I literally have like one of those moments, like the Sherlock Holmes moments. And I go,
Eureka. Yeah.
And I literally did this. And about 3 days I did this, right? Before I ever talked about it in public. I was doing regular live streams on Tuesday night on YouTube and Odyssey at the time. And then when I start going down that rabbit hole for my patrons, we start talking about it. I start talking about it on my twice weekly market reports for my patrons. I'm thinking about it. Guys, could this possibly be right? What's going on here? I don't understand. One, I have a patron at the time says to me, could this be the truth? And he says, well, they don't call him private equity Powell for nothing. That's one. And then later I get a text from a patron who's a banker. And he starts laying this idea about SOFR out to me. And I went, correct me if I'm wrong. What you're saying is this, and this. And he's like, you got it. And it's the SOFR versus LIBOR thing. It's the idea
because LIBOR died, of course, after the LIBOR crisis we had. And now SOFR is the main benchmark interest rate is used to price debt in. But explain to me, because for a lot of my viewers, it's also a bit difficult sometimes to understand the Eurodollar system. You mentioned it a few times. I know it's an offshore dollar system that arose in the 50s, and it's being heavily used by non-US companies, governments across the world. Mm-hmm. How is the US or Trump going to manage or look at the Eurodollar system? Is it going to be abandoned? Is it going to live a different life on its own? Because the Eurodollar system needs the Federal Reserve and US banks too, right?
It needs to exist, Paul. This is a very good question, and it's a very complicated question. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to. I don't know how much time we have to go through this, but it's a very complicated question. But the important part here is to understand that when LIBOR was the law of the land, when all the debt instruments in the United States and around the world that were dollar denominated were quoted in LIBOR. My credit card, your auto loan, a Thai company trying to build a rice factory. And if you use dollars, and for 10 years we were at the zero bound, so the dollar was the ultimate carry currency in the world, right? And the Eurodollar system explodes, and another couple of orders of magnitude, it explodes at the zero bound because capital's free, dollars are free. You can buy as many as you want, lend them out, and buy them at 0% and buy Turkish debt at 12% and make the big, right? Yeah. Hey, it's a brilliant system for the people buying Turkish debt. So it explodes. Now, what is a Eurodollar? A Eurodollar is the dollar that sits in a foreign bank account. The Eurodollar system is the unregulated portion of what's known as the shadow banking system. It basically says, look, if I've got $1 billion sitting in a bank and you come to me for a business loan, we don't have to go to the central bank to buy. We don't have to go to the bank that I hold my money in to go buy for you to buy that loan. And I look at you and go, hey man, the bank will loan you that at 9%. I'll give you 6%. Let's write the contract and it's off. And so it's never on the bank's balance sheet. But my deposits on the bank's liability side of the balance sheet is impaired because I've lent that money out, which the bank has to hold reserves against. to you. Now, let's explore all of that. So when LIBOR is the law of the land, and the Fed looks at the domestic economy and says, inflation's starting to creep up, getting close towards full employment, blah, blah, all their Keynesian metrics, which I'm not even a big fan of, but whatever. That's how they set monetary policy. You're like, we need to raise interest rates. And so they do so. Now, here's a question for you. You look at the European economy and you look at the American economy and you say to yourself, which one can, on balance, handle a higher rate of interest?
None.
The United States. We have a much more dynamic economy, much deeper capital markets, all of that stuff. We could handle going from the Fed going, say, previous cycles from 2% up to 6%. The Eurodollar system can only handle 4%. And then it starts to collapse because it's levered and levered. It's got leverage upon leverage upon leverage upon leverage. Because I have $1 billion in the bank. You borrow $500 million from me. You then turn around, take $200 million and build a business with it, and then lend the other $300 million out to somebody else who does something else to, I don't know, buy Bitcoin or speculate on NVIDIA stock, or you pick your poison. When money's free, everything happens, right? We get pets.com, we get Pornhub, we get all of this stuff, right? We get George Soros, renting flash mobs in Portland, Oregon. We get him buying AG races, attorney general races in states that he's targeting for the next election. We get the Maidan in Ukraine. We get CIA operations overthrowing governments around the world, all laundered through private bank accounts, none of which shows up in the bank's balance sheet, none of which is under the purview of domestic banking regulators or foreign regulators. It's all running around the world. It's the shadow banking system. Now, in this scenario, though, let's back up. Let's just take the simple scenario. You have a shadow banking system that can handle 4%. The Fed wants to go to 6%. It goes up he raises to 4%. He goes past 4%. He goes to 5%, 5.25%. He needs to go to 6%. He only goes to 5%. LIBOR starts to blow out because the demand for offshore dollars starts to explode. What happens? Well, since my credit card is tied to LIBOR in the American economy, and I have the balance sheet room personally to be able to handle the Fed going to 6%, but I'm not allowed now. Why? Because LIBOR blows out. The Fed raises by 200 basis points. LIBOR blows out by 400 basis points. And now all of a sudden, my 9% credit card is a 13% credit card. I can't afford 13%. I can only afford 11% on my salary. I stop spending. I stop spending disproportionately based on what the Fed does, what the Fed's done, right? Because Europe's in trouble. So that is how the Eurodollar system is the tail wagging the monetary policy dog of the United States under LIBOR. Under SOFR, no offense,
you just run your own monetary policy disregarding.
Right, and then you guys have to deal with the consequences, which is why when Powell started raising rates 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I said, after I birthed the whole argument around August or September of that year, I said, oh, hell, if I were Powell, I'd raise to 6%. I just picked a number out of my head. I was 6% sounds about right. Because that's probably where no one wants the rate to go. Like 8% is too high. 6% will probably do the trick. And everybody's like, dude, if he goes to 1%, the whole world's going to collapse. I'm like, let's see. SOFR becomes the law of the land. No new debt contract in the United States is written against LIBOR as of January 1, 2022. Powell's reconfirmed in mid-February 2022. The Ukraine-Russia war breaks out on February 22nd. Powell at his very next meeting starts raising interest rates. First 25, then 50, then 75, then 75, then 75, then 75. By July, he's got Christine Lagarde screaming so hard about raising interest rates that fast that she has to create the transmission protection instrument to protect credit spreads.
Yeah, but then if Powell's going to reduce rates, assuming that Trump will be able to cut expenses with maybe even 2 trillion, like you also mentioned yourself in one of your podcasts, and Powell's going to lower rates, then it would actually be good then for the Eurodollar system.
He's not trying to destroy it, because like it's not like anybody wants the U.S. dollar to stop being the reserve currency tomorrow. That would create Mad Max. You cut $2 trillion from the American budget. Powell keeps wanting to shrink the Fed's balance sheet. Also a very important source of liquidity. He wants to do both of those things. He is doing those things. He's lowering interest rates and still cutting, and still, letting U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities roll off the Fed's balance sheet. He's still doing quantitative tightening. So, but understand that the Eurodollar system was creating a situation where the Fed could never fully allow the malinvestment from the previous cycle to work itself completely out. The Fed always had to start cutting rates before they wanted to, because the effect on the American economy was far worse than it should have been, because we weren't in control of the price of our own money. Now we're in control of the price of our own money. And it's a collateralized rate based on the demand for money within the actual banking system and the actual money markets. That's a fundamental change. It's no longer 18 City of London bankers getting together and going, this is the rate today.
Yeah, it makes much more sense, of course, to be the master of your own interest rate and not have some London bankers decide it for you.
Well, okay, so I understand. Just to make one last point on that, and then I'll let this go. What this does is it says the Federal Reserve is literally saying we no longer want to be the central bank of the world like we were under Bernanke, Yellen, and Greenspan. We now want to be the central bank of the United States. That is a fundamental. That's a fundamental statement of humility that has fundamentally changed the way the world now has to operate.
Yeah, and also recognizing the multipolarity that is becoming now as something clear for everyone to recognize. And so if Trump is able to balance the budget, and if the Fed is also working alongside the administration, then possibly the U.S. finances will improve. Would that be, because you're also saying that gold will go up, but assuming that Trump will establish a proper fiscal behavior and the Fed is doing a proper monetary job, wouldn't that be bad for gold then?
Maybe. No, I don't think so, because I think we're so over leveraged still. I think that there's still a lot of work to do, and you got to regain the trust of the markets. You're also dealing with a global market for gold, where now national balance sheets are going to need collateral. Yeah. Because there's not going to be as many U.S. Treasuries floating around, right?
So revaluing gold would do the trick.
And so let's talk about something else that and moreover, the world is moving back to a more mercantilist system, where the commodity producers are now demanding to be paid a living wage, just to be like cheeky about it, a living wage for the commodities. Right? They're no longer being paid in depreciating digital U.S. dollar IOUs. Now they want to be paid in something tangible. So you have to invite you have to invite a stronger dollar, and that's one level of it. They're going to demand that with all these dollars that are floating around. Those are going to have to be extinguished if you want to, it's going to demand that everybody start really unwinding all these massively rehypothecated dollar trades. And central banks are going to need to really start thinking about their leverage relative to their gold reserves. And the United States has a sincere problem, because the Fed's balance sheet, if you believe that Fort Knox has the 8,133.5 tons of gold, I happen to believe it's there. It's there, yeah. But if I'm going to go with the best case scenario. The gold's there. There are IOUs written against it, but at the end of the day, they're IOUs, they're paper, and we can just go, you know what? Possession is 90% of the law. I own it. Here's an IOU. Here's some dollars. Yeah, fungal. I'm Italian. Like, this is not hard. Like, nah, it's mine. I'm not giving it to you. You can have dollars. You want dollars? You don't want dollars? Fine. We're going to give you dollars anyway. If you don't want dollars, then you get nothing. Okay. I hate to put it that way, but that's the way the game's played. That's my scenario. Now, that scenario may be wrong in case everything I'm about to lay out is an order of magnitude worse. Because there's not 8,133.5 tons of gold in there. There's 813.5 tons of gold in there, or whatever it is. But let's just say it's there. At current prices, that's what? Around $600-700 billion? So it's 8 to 10% of the Fed's balance sheet. That's actual collateral, hard collateral, not bullshit collateral like a U.S. Treasury bond or a mortgage-backed security.
Yeah.
So at what point is trust in the Federal Reserve and the government going to be restored? Well, we can do that one of two ways. We can raise the value of the gold reserves on the Fed's balance sheet to equal the monetary base, and the Fed's total balance sheet, or we can shrink the Fed's balance sheet and allow the price of gold to rise slowly and without much disruption, which is pretty much what you're seeing.
Right.
$250 up, $150 down, $250 up, $150 down. Ding.
Yeah.
Nice. And that's what I actually want to see in gold. Nice, steady rise. I don't know if it's going to, I don't know where that number is going to be, but let's go from roughly $2,800 now or $2,700 now. And I know it's $2,650 today, but it doesn't matter. Roughly now, the $2,650. How big does the Fed balance sheet need to be in order to regain trust? $4 trillion? What's the leverage ratio? Right now, it's 12 to 1. Is that leverage ratio 6 to 1? 3 to 1? 1 to 1? I don't know. The market's going to decide for that. We as Americans are going to decide that. The global capital with a capital GC is going to determine that. And that's when interest rates that's where the proper demand for treasuries and all of this stuff and all the froth comes off the system. But we're going to do so at, hopefully, what you're going to see is the gold price rise, inflation moderate. I think we're going to get another round of inflation. Not a big one, but another round of inflation. But commodity prices are going to go, and and between commodity prices and gold, they're all going to tell us what the new pricing level is relative to assets, to credit-based assets. You're going to have credit asset price deflation, commodity price inflation. Bob's your uncle. 5 years from now, we're staring at a $7,000 or $8,000 gold price. $200 a barrel oil or $150 a barrel oil, maybe lower, and everybody's a millionaire.
It's
but
strange.
As opposed to Mad Max, hyperinflation,
which we don't like now,
living together, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, hey, maybe strange thought. Would you be surprised if perhaps Trump would like to join BRICS? I mean, given the fact that he's going to focus on America, that he is very much in favor of sovereignty and all of those things. He likes trade. He's a deal maker. Like, strange thought, but would he like to join BRICS in the future, and then leave Europe hanging?
That is hilarious, and it's something I've never actually thought about. No, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's cool. I think it's funny. All the commodity producers get together and like, you know what? To everybody who doesn't make commodities, hey, but then they have to kick China out of the BRICS because the Chinese don't produce any commodities either. They buy them from everybody else. I mean, the Chinese can't support their own economy without going around the world. The Japanese can't either. The Japanese are comfortable with it. They've been doing it their entire life in Japan. Like once they got away from like wood, right? So Japan, the United States has more. I mean, the United States and Russia could rule the world simply from a commodities perspective, right? I mean, they're natural allies. Why do you think the Europeans are like, don't let the Russians and the Americans get together? We lose.
Yeah. And
that nasty little island off the north, on the other side of the North Sea. I think it's the North Sea. They were that nasty little island. That nasty little island needs to stop thinking it's in charge of anything other than Scottish sheep herds, because that's all they deserve.
Well,
That's
interesting,
it.
Tom. Yeah. Now they still believe they're the big empire that they used to be. Final question, because it's something that worries me a lot. It's very actual. We saw today long range missiles being used in Russia by Ukraine. We also saw this week Putin updating the nuclear doctrine of Russia. How close are we? Because everything discussed today is based on the premise that the world continues to spin. But if we have a huge escalation and World War III, possibly with nuclear weapons being used, then you and I are not talking anymore next year. So
No,
how worried are you by everything that's going on in the world at the moment?
I'm very worried about this because it's clearly to me a gambit by the. I'm going to name names here. It's a gambit by the British to continue to control one last gasp. The American political system and manipulate it and leave Trump with a war he can't get away from. The Bank of England is facing bankruptcy. That's one aspect of this. And if you want a really good conversation about this, I absolutely recommend you reach out to my friend Alex Craner. I'll be happy to give you the introduction on this. But Alex has done yeoman's work on this. He's my consigliere, my co-conspirator in All Roads Lead to London. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, we'd love to talk to him too. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you would absolutely have a wonderful time with Alex. He's a brilliant man and a good friend. I'm very worried about this because it's very clear that Joe Biden, one, did not issue this order. Two,
okay.
No, who issued that order? Joe Biden is nowhere. Joe Biden didn't issue this order. His cabinet issued this order. Now, in the wake of this, I wrote a tweet about this the other day. You might find it if you follow me if you go ahead and follow me on Twitter. You'll probably see the tweet because it's the one that's made the most rounds recently. But I kind of laid out on Monday morning what I thought was going on, because the minute I heard a whiff of the phrase 25th Amendment relative to Biden and this authorization of using ATACMS to attack Russia, I understood the play. And the play is as follows. You say that Biden authorized the use of long-range missiles to attack Russia. And then everybody gets fake up in arms about, oh my God, senile Joe is
one final trick.
World War III. We need to get rid of him. We install the cabinet. You'll easily get 2/3 of the cabinet and Kamala Harris to go along with this, which then sends it. This is the 25th Amendment. This is Article 3 of the 25th Amendment, which would then go to Congress. If you twist enough arms in Congress to remove Joe Biden as president, then you install Kamala Harris and she moves up the chain. And she becomes president. At that point, you now have a compliant puppet who says, and then all you need then is a classic British false flag to blame on the Russians for killing for doing something horrible. Oh, I don't know, a dirty bomb in Kiev. And then compliant Davos / British puppet, because in this case, the British and Davos are absolutely in cahoots. They want the United States and Russia destroyed, and then they're going to fight over who gets to run the world afterwards. That's the framework. British remnant is happy to fight the continental powers of Europe to see who gets to run the world afterwards. Control the post-World War II, institutions, which would be the post-World War III institutions that would survive. No, that's their plan. And then she goes along with this and commits the United States to dealing with the evil Putler and starting World War III of some form or another, forcing Putin into a move that forces him to escalate beyond the point of no return.
With the risk of global annihilation.
With the risk of global annihilation, because evil, malignant narcissists do not back down. They double down. And I've been saying for like most of this year, it's seriously, honestly, going back almost 2 years, I've been saying, okay, all the moves devolve down to this one. At some point, they flip the game board. I have a speech I did at the Ron Paul Institute on Foreign Policy 2 years ago, 2 years ago, June, about where I literally lay it all out this way and say, well, what happens when they're stuck and they've run out of moves? Well, they flip the game board, right? And then what did we do? So they're going to put in front of us the Hobson's choice of, we get to remain in charge and diddle your kids and, drink baby's blood and make you eat bugs and live in pods and blah, 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 and die live a life of quiet desperation. Or you can die in nuclear war. Your choice. That's who these people are. And if you think that they're anything less than this, any less depraved than that, then you haven't quite understood the world you've been living in. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is everything I've laid out in this podcast implies that Wall Street understands this. The sovereigntists within the DoD understand this. There are many members of the American government that understand this, and that Putin understands this, which is why I firmly believe that the deconfliction hotline between the Russian Ministry of Defense and the United States is a permanent open call right now. And all they do is put people on hold or put people on mute so they can talk and then open conversation back up again. How they're trying to get the right information to the right people and then seed the right information into the press. Truth of the matter is that I don't even think those were ATACMS. I think those were Storm Shadow missiles fired by the Ukrainians with British help.
The Storm Shadows were also used, I just read. So
yes.
Over the next few days, we'll hear more about all the details. But yeah, thanks so much, Tom, for talking to me for this long. I promise you it will be like 45 minutes, but it's much longer. Thanks a lot for all your insights. It's
45 minutes, dude. I can't even get started at 45 minutes with most of the stuff that we wanted to talk about. And that's
I tricked you into a long conversation.
No, actually you didn't. You really didn't. I like the filibuster. This is our first conversation together. This is normal.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
This is normal. So no worries.
Well, you definitely make me think and rethink a lot of my premises and assumptions. So I will probably have to chew on this conversation for the next few days. I'll try to publish as soon as possible. But thanks a lot. And where can people? You have, of course, your newsletter, Gold, Goats, and Guns, and then your own website. Perhaps you can just mention them. Sure. I'll also put them in the show notes.
Sure. The newsletter is published through Patreon. We have a Patreon service. We've got two tiers. We have a $4 tier and a $12 tier. The $12 tier gets everything, which includes the newsletter, which is a monthly kind of retail investor style newsletter for that's both geopolitically focused and we cover everything along with a portfolio, kind of a standard thing in that respect. But it's also where myself and my partner Dexter White write exclusively for. And then I do twice weekly video podcasts, what I call the market reports, which are both a kind of a 20 to 30 minute rant like this one, plus a deep technical analysis on all the important markets, gold, silver, Bitcoin, the Dow, and everything else. That's at Patreon/Gold, Goats, and Guns. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL, my initials TFL1728. And of course, you can follow me on my blog at tomluongo.me or goldgoatsandguns.com.
Thanks a lot, Tom, and keep it up. And hopefully we can do this again in a year or so.
Sure.